Hello everyone, I'm thrilled to welcome you to the maiden edition of our new program series for the last quarter of the year 2024 on Amorgate Radio Communications. I remain your host, Titilola Ogushono. We appreciate everyone who joined us on our last program series called Issues in Economic Development, right from the maiden edition to the last episode. Thank you all for your messages, feedback, suggestions, the likes, and support. We are indeed grateful to everyone, for the likes, for sharing the program link on your various social media handles with friends, colleagues, and family members. We at Amorgate do not take this for granted. We are sincerely grateful and we sincerely appreciate you all. We would continue our discussion this quarter with another expository, explosive, intriguing, insightful, and highly relevant program series titled Inflation Dynamics and Economic Development. The issue of inflation is continuously relevant and germane in the scheme of economic development. The global inflation terrain is quite complex and dynamic. The issue of rising inflation rates cuts across various economies. Developed economies like the United States and even Europe have experienced increased inflation rates. In the United States, though the Federal Reserve has an annual inflation rate target of 2%, however, in the year 2022, inflation reached highest levels, reaching 9.1% mid-year, and that has been the highest since 1981. Likewise, in Europe, in the same year, 2022, October to be precise, average inflation rate was 11.5%. Various factors have been said, to have influenced this rate of inflation, the high rate, which include factors like supply chain disruptions and fiscal impetus. Also, emerging economies are not spared, like India, Brazil, South Africa. They've also witnessed rising inflation rate. In the same vein, developing economies like Nigeria are heavily burdened by the sporadic rise in inflation rates. In Nigeria, the headline inflation rate as of June 2024 was the range was between 33.4% and 34.19%. Now, you could ask, what do we mean by headline inflation? Okay, this is a raw figure that reflects changes in consumer price index throughout the economy. Okay, consumer price index is a measure of inflation. We have various measures of inflation, one of which is consumer price index. Well, in subsequent episodes, we'll be dealing with how do you measure inflation. A lot of people talk about inflation, okay, but they might not know how do we measure it in an economy. Okay, so that is when we talk about headline, inflation, and it's a useful measure to actually determine how the cost of living is likely to fluctuate either on a monthly or a yearly basis. Now, headline inflation actually differs from core inflation, which is when you have your consumer price index adjusted to exclude food and energy prices, which are quite volatile. Meanwhile, extreme global inflation rate was actually experienced in the 1980s and 1990s. However, in the early 2000s, global inflation rate reduced and became relatively stable. The rate around this time was between 3% to 5% per year. But something happened across the globe in the year 2008. The world experienced a sharp increase in inflationary pressure as a result of the global financial crisis, also known to everyone as the Great Recession era. Well, this didn't last for too long because, in 2010s, things later picked up, and you could see, because the inflationary rate in 2010s became, relatively stable for a very long time until the virus pandemic, which then took its toll on world economy. Now, let's take a quick look at world inflation figures as measured by Consumer Price Index. In 2020, the world inflation rate was 1.92%, and it's notable that represents a 0.29% decline from the rate in 2019. But in 2021, the inflation rate was 3.47%, and that represents a 1.55% increase in world inflation rate. So what happened in 2022? This figure went up again to 7.97%, and that is a very significant increase, and that represents a 4.5% increase in world inflation rate. But in 2023, this figure fell by 2.28%, so it declined by that percentage. So the world inflation figure was 5.69%. High inflationary pressure on rates could pose serious threat to economic growth and development in any country or nation. That is why governments of various countries and nations continue to deploy various policies like fiscal policy, monetary policies, direct and selective measures to control level of inflation rate in their country. Some government could come up with contractionary fiscal policy, that is the use of either the taxes, and government expenditure to bring down the level of inflation, because economists will tell you that inflation is a monetary phenomenon. So when you have a lot of more money in supply, you have an increase in money supply, if not controlled, will lead to the issue of higher prices. Okay, so government will come up with contractionary fiscal policies, increasing tax rates, reduce the level of government expenditure, or even various monetary policies. Okay, we have the monetary policy rate, we have the reserve required ratio, the RRR, liquidity ratio, or even the excess reserve ratio. These are part of the measures that government will deploy across globe, to curb inflationary pressure. And when they talk about contractionary monetary policies, that is, when you are increasing the RRR, you are increasing the liquidity ratio, you are increasing your excess reserve ratio, so that you curb, the lending capabilities, of the banks, the banking sector, the financial institution. That is geared at reducing the level of money supply in the economy. But you need to know again that sometimes inflationary pressure is not triggered only by increase in money supply. There are other factors too that would lead to an increase in prices of goods and services in the economy. And you could ask, why do we have government of various nations continuously deploying measures to bring down the level of inflation in their countries? It's because a continuous rise in prices of goods and services, if not adequately controlled, would have adverse effects on the economy. What would happen is, when you have inflationary pressure, the first thing is going to attack, which is going to affect, is that going to lead to a decline in the purchasing power of your people. So if I have $1,000 and $1,000 could purchase about 20 items, if that inflationary pressure, with that $1,000, I'm not likely to be able to pay 20. I might be able to purchase just 10. And when there is a decline in purchasing power, your people are not likely to be able to save. It's going to discourage savings, because I don't want to keep my money in the bank when I know that what I can purchase right now, with $1,000 like I use, I'm not going to be able to purchase it. I'm not going to be able to purchase it $1,500 tomorrow. So what is the incentive to save? And when your people do not save, it's going to affect the level of capital stock, because we believe that when people save, then it's going to be a function of your investment. When people save, it's going to lead to a rise and increase in the level of investment in the economy. But when inflationary pressure is high and people are discouraged, it becomes a disincentive for people to save. So it means that the level of investment in such an economy is going to fall. And when the level of investment in such an economy falls, what is going to happen? What's going to happen is that it's going to reduce the level of production of goods and services. People can produce, people can provide services, and when that happens, I'm going to tell you that it will have multiplier effect on the economy. Now, let's even look at it this way. If I cannot produce more, it means that I'm not going to employ more people. So it means that the unemployment rate is not likely to go down. In fact, when my level of production even drops and I'm not even producing more, so what happens? What happens is that I might even have to downsize, or what we call right size, lay people off, and that would happen. And when people cannot even produce, let's look at that point, you are reducing the level of economic growth as measured by your gross domestic product. So if you are not producing more and your gross domestic product measures the value of monetary value of final goods and services produced in the economy as a measure of economic growth, if that is falling, then we are not going to be talking about growth. And if you cannot talk about growth, definitely you are not talking about achieving economic development. You're going to lead to a drastic decline in level of economic development in such a country. When you cannot even attain growth, can you talk about development? And the world is even talking about sustainable economic development. How do you sustain your level of development such that you are not going to, make the next generation worse off? You're not going to make them worse off. So you're talking about sustained development over the years, decades to come. So if you're not even achieving, a decent level of economic growth, how do you talk about economic development, let alone sustainable economic development? So that's why we are going to be zooming our lenses critically on inflation dynamics, the relationship between this and economic development. We're going to be zooming our lenses critically in this last quarter on this new program series. We are going to be looking at the definition, various perspectives of inflation. We are going to be looking at the types of inflation. Is it according to the causes of inflation, all the rates of inflation, and the various types of inflation that we have. We are going to be looking at various measures of inflation. I've mentioned earlier one of the measures as the consumer price index. We're going to look at what is consumer price index, what is wholesale price index, what are other measures of inflation. We are going to be delving into the effect of inflationary pressure in an economy. What effect does it have? We are going to be looking at the causes of the drivers of inflation in an economy. We are going to be looking at the effect of inflationary pressure on economic growth and development. We are going to be going around the globe, looking at inflationary trends around the globe. We are going to be looking at developed economies, what have they faced this? How well did they handle this? We are going to be looking at emerging economies. We are going to be looking at the developing economies. We are going to be looking at what have they done, which of these top. Do we have countries with the lowest level of inflationary pressure across the globe? We are aware that during the pandemic years, businesses, were very slow across the globe, but some countries picked up really fast after the pandemic, while some are still, grappling with the effects under the weight of the adverse effects of the pandemic. We're going to be going around the globe to look at what lessons can be learned. Those countries that have gotten it right in terms of achieving very insignificant level of inflationary pressure, what have they done? What are the lessons to be learned from this countries. Next, we are going to be looking at the perception. What is the perception of inflation? Is it good or bad? This is something I like to talk about a lot, because when we mention inflation, to the average, anybody out there, is the first thing that comes to mind is, oh, inflation is actually bad, okay? But there's some, merit, and there's some advantages, and there's some benefits to having, a bit of inflationary pressure in an economy. And if you're saying yes, the advantages, there are merit to having a bit of inflationary pressure inherent in an economy, then what is the figure? Okay, what should it be? What's the benchmark? Okay, we'll be looking at this. Then we'll also look at how do you protect your finances, your businesses? How do you mitigate the consequences of inflation in an economy, as a business, as an individual, as a company, as an entity? How do you, even as government, how do you protect yourself? Okay, what are those strategies that you can deploy? We'll be looking at that, in this quarter. If you're just joining us, thank you so much for joining. Welcome to Amorgate Radio Communications, and the program is Inflation Dynamics and Economic Development, and this happens to be the maiden edition of this new program series. So we'll consider various perspectives or definition of inflation. Inflation can be defined as the rate of increase in prices over a given period of time, usually, a year. So if you are looking at the rate at which prices have increased over a given period of time, you are already referring to inflation. It has also been expressed as the persistent increase in prices of goods and services over a given period of time. And I like this definition, because from the definition, the word persistent is very key. It means that if the increase in prices of goods and services does not occur for a period of time, okay, so you can say that is inflationary pressure. What do I mean? So if there is a sporadic rise in the prices of a particular item, okay, maybe in a particular month, and the prices just goes up sporadically, okay, for maybe just a day or two or three, that cannot be deemed to be inflation, okay, because it's not. If it goes up that way 2-3 days and it comes down, that's not inflation. It has to be persistent. So you are looking at a particular economy and you see prices going up, okay, from day one, the first month, it increases again, second month, it increases the third month, and and that's it. So when there's a persistent increase in prices of goods and services over a given period of time, then you are talking to inflation. And to some economists, how they will define that inflation is when there's an increase in the cost of living. So the cost of purchasing food items is on the rise, the cost of housing is on the rise, accommodation is on the rise, building materials is on the rise, the cost of shipping is on the is on the high side. So when we have increase in the cost of living, when the increase in terms of health facilities, adequate medical facilities, drugs on the rise, on the increase. So when there's an increase in the cost of living, you are speaking to inflation. I also like this other perspective of inflation is, okay, yes, talking about persistent increase in prices, yes, cost of living, but this particular definition is saying that inflation is the gradual loss or decrease, or what we call the decline in the purchasing power of money as a result of a broad rise in prices of goods and services over a given period of time. I like this definition because it is robust. Okay, now when there is a gradual rise, it rises, decline in the purchasing power. You are bringing in money. So one of the things that inflation does, inflationary pressure does, is that it erodes the purchasing power of money. A purchasing power of money speaks to what money can buy. Okay, so if I have $5,000, what can you buy, this year? As against what could my $5,000 dollars by this month last year, 2023. So you're looking at that, so the purchasing power. So when the purchasing power of money is eroded, you are speaking to that factor, that variable called inflation rate. Okay, and the reason why this is the reason that's attributable to this is the broad rise in prices of goods and services. While some economists would argue, that's what I said, we are going to be looking at inflation, is it good or bad, one of the episodes that we're going to be having. Some would argue that, look, if you need that element of inflation, because when there's inflationary pressure, it's going to attract foreign investment into your economy. That's a perspective to inflation. But on the whole, on the average, this perspective is that a decline in the purchasing power of money, as a result of a rise in the price of goods and services, speaks to inflation, and that is one of the demerits of inflation. Okay, so what we'll be taking further on this maiden edition is the types of inflation. Well, you should note that the types of inflation can be categorized based on either the causes of inflation or the rate of inflation. So if you are looking at the types, you can look at it from the perspective of the causes of inflation or the rate of inflation. So what I'm going to be starting with is classification of inflation according to the rate of inflation, so according to the movement. So I will take the first one, which is creeping inflation. We say inflation rate is creeping when prices rises at a mild rate over a period of time. Yes, that's increase. You see significant, obvious increase in prices of goods and services, but it's going to be at a mild rate. And the rate recommended for you to be termed creeping is, between 2% and 3, okay? And this is actually manageable and generally considered good for the growth of the economy. So it's not all types of inflation are totally bad. Once between 2 and 3%, that is what we call creeping. Okay, and why do we say this is good for the growth of the economy? Is because producers, traders, companies, firms can make more profit, and this would encourage further investment. So imagine I'm a company and I've sold a particular item for maybe $5, and it's still $5 next year. Or I've sold a particular item for 1,000 naira, and next year it's still 1,000 naira. I can't increase, So when prices increase, sometimes when the inflationary pressure is 2 to 3%, so it means that even the cost of production, when it's going to increase, will be just a bit. So you can still make more money. Okay, because when the cost of production is very high, at a higher rate than that, then such producer cannot make so much money, not make supernormal profits. Okay, but creeping inflation is when prices rises at a mild rate over a period of time, between 2% and 3%, and is considered good for the growth of the economy. That's the perspective to creeping inflation. So that which other type of inflation do we have according to the rate of inflation? We have what we call walking, like a walk, take a walk, WALKING, or trotting, TROTTING, inflation. So what do we mean by trotting? What do we mean by walking? Definitely know that when you are creeping, when you creep is slower. Okay, when you walk, it's likely to be faster than creeping. Okay, so this is when prices increases more at a higher rate than creeping inflation rate. Okay, so what is the percentage of inflation that can fall under walking, or what we call trotting inflation? That is when the inflationary figure is between 3% and 10%. Now, at this point, it's not going to be totally disastrous to our economy, okay? But when the inflationary pressure is between 3% and trotting, working towards 10%, we expect that this should send a strong signal to the government. At that point, when it's 10%, it's not alarming, but it's a signal. Okay, and we expect that that measures should be put in place at this point is 10% to curb prices. You know why? Because if this is not curbed, it can escalate further into the next type of inflation that I'm going to mention. It can escalate further into galloping or running inflation. So, there's a difference between creeping, when you're walking, or what we call trotting, okay, and galloping. As the name implies, running inflation. Okay, so that takes me to my third inflation type, which I said galloping, running, and sometimes you could see it, people say it, what you call upping. It means the same thing. Galloping, upping, running inflation. Okay, and in this case, this is when the general price level rises by two digits or even more, two digits, okay, as a percentage annually. Now, if you look at what we said, from creeping is between 2 and 3%, walking, they have 3, in that case, 10, okay. So once it's 2 digits, 10%, okay, we are talking about when it's more than 10%, we're talking about galloping. Now, it has to be more than 10%, but we expect it to be less than 50%. That is galloping. Okay? And at this point, you realize that what happens is that there will be a significant rise in the cost of production. And this is going to discourage investors from investing. And this is a dangerous zone. Okay? This is when you realize that government will come in with all the contractionary, measures, fiscal policy measures, monetary policy measures. In fact, in addition to that, government will come up with selective controls. We have diverse kinds of selective controls that government can deploy. So it's not going to be about fiscal measures alone. You now have, a situation of multifaceted approach, measures together to, curb inflationary pressure. And why do we do this in governance? It's because you don't want to, go into that stage of extreme case. And it takes me to my fourth type. And this is an extreme form or type of inflation, what we call hyperinflation. So what is hyperinflation? What is the rate? This is when the inflation rate is above 50%. 50% above that is hyper. We have economies that are as high as over 100%. That is alarming and extreme. Okay, and what usually causes this, majorly from evidence that I've seen across the globe, is when we have a large increase in money supply in an economy. Money supply speaks to the total amount of money in circulation in an economy. When you cannot control the level of money supply, circulation of money in an economy, what it leads to is hyperinflation. And this situation is very dangerous because it would it would reduce the value of domestic currency to an alarming rate. We keep talking about that inflation rate. Definitely your currency is already getting devalued when there's inflationary rate. It means that it means that it's going to take more of your currency to buy another currency that is strong. That's of strong, but the inflationary pressure is relatively low. Okay, and why as economists we don't want this to happen is that if you are not careful, when you have hyperinflation, it could erode, the functions of money. We talk about money as a medium of exchange. We talk about money as serving the function of store of value. We talk about money serving the function of unit of account. We talk about money serving the function of standard of deferred payment. But what what hyperinflation does is that when inflationary pressure is at that level, more than 50%, close to 90, 100, what it does that it could erode the store of value function of money and also the medium of exchange function. I'm sure somebody is saying, wow, is that true? Yes, when you talk about medium of exchange, you are talking about using money, in payment settlements of, purchase of goods and services. You apply inflation. If it's set in the economy, people would not want to take your currency. You can say, wow, as it happened, just imagine in a particular country, people saying, look, I don't want the euro, we don't want it because the euro value, you have inflationary pressure. So it's not going to happen. Nobody wants that because nobody wants to buy things in that currency because it's totally of no value, in the marketplace. Okay, so you don't want to get to that stage. So when people don't want to trade in that currency, it means that money has lost its function as a medium of exchange. If I'm not even collecting to exchange, a settlement for my services rendered, how do I want to even store my value? How do I want to keep such money in the bank? It's not going to happen. Okay, so government will not want inflationary pressure to get to this stage. Now, you could say that as it happened before, have you had countries that experienced hyperinflation? Yes, we have the case of Zimbabwe. Okay, we also have the case of Venezuela. Okay, and it's worth considering what went wrong. How did they get into that space of hyperinflation? Like I told you, don't get to that stage of hyperinflation overnight. You will have creeping. Okay, sometimes some people start with one key, but before it gets to that stage, it have started from a particular stage. So if it's not creeping, probably you started your journey from the walking or trotting stage, or before it gets into the galloping, running, or what we call the upping inflation. That's why we keep measuring inflationary pressure. That's why even in Nigeria, we have the Nigeria Bureau of Statistics coming up with monthly figures, looking at the rate of increase or the rate of decline. But this has to be measured so that you do not even fall near, not even into that space of hyperinflation. Well, this is all we can take on today's maiden edition of our program. I hope that you have learned one or two things. Kindly click the like button if you have. We'll continue our discussion next Friday, same time on Amorgate Radio Communications. We'll be going further to look at the causes of hyperinflation in a country like Zimbabwe, what happened, and we look at other types of inflation according to the causes of inflation, and we'll go forward in this discussion next week. I want to encourage you all to join our other program series that run through Mondays to Friday. They are very expository, insightful, intriguing, informative program series that you're going to learn from. Is always 5 p.m. WAT, Monday through Fridays. My run same time next week on Friday. If you have any comment, feedback, questions for us, the email address to send your questions to is contact@theamorgate.org. I'll repeat the email address. If you have questions, feedback for us, the email address is contact@theamorgate.org. Also, we encourage you to share the program links with your friends, colleagues, family members. They need to enjoy and benefit from these rich episodes that we churn out every week. If you want to learn more about us, kindly visit our social media handles. On Facebook is Amorgate, LinkedIn, Instagram is Amorgate. And remember us for your consulting needs, for your communication needs, for your finance, audit tax needs. Amorgate is ready. This is what you have always done. You are passionate about. You are ready to support you to build transgenerational institutions. I will leave us with the words of Sam Ewing, which says, inflation is when you pay $15 for the $10 haircut you used to get for $5 when you add air. I like this a lot because it captures aptly what inflation entails. Oh, thank you so much. I remain Titulola Ogunsona saying bye from here.